the way you did it is not going to work going forward. And you have to say, it sucks and I'm sorry. Those are the things you have to start with. This next generation is not going to do that. And you can try, but they're not going to do that. So if you want to be successful, you have to abandon the things that made you successful to this moment. So first and foremost that. And it does suck and I am sorry. But if you want to be successful with this next generation, this post-pandemic workforce, you have to understand that you're only going to be as successful as they are. And so to be as successful as they are, you have to get to know them.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. I hope this next episode helps you thrive in life and leadership. And if you enjoy it, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. That way you'll never miss a thing. Pastors, I know how hard it can be to keep your sermons feeling fresh and relevant, and especially you're preaching week after week. So maybe you hit a writer's block or it's Friday and you haven't really finished things up. I want to help. So I've got a 10-step preaching cheat sheet. After decades of preaching, I simplified the whole prep process into a series of steps and reminders that can help you ensure your sermons are engaging, relevant, and memorable. Super easy to use, 10 simple prompts with examples, and you can start using it as early as this Sunday. So visit preachingcheatsheet.com or click the link in the description and you'll get a copy sent to you for free today. This episode is also presented by 10 by 10. Did you know that approximately 1 million young people in America drift from their faith every year? And this means that by 2034, 10 million young people will walk away from their faith and miss out on experiencing the abundant life that Jesus promised. Well, imagine if we could do something to reverse this. That's why 10 by 10 was born. A national initiative created to help make faith matter more to 10 million young people over the next 10 years. Together, we can turn the tide of young people walking away from their faith. So the question is, will you answer the call to help 10 by 10 advocate for the faith of the next generation? You can go to 1010.org to learn more. That's 1010.org to learn more. And now to today's episode.
Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, hi there. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So we're going to dive into work today. And I would love for you, you said something just before we hit record, the picture behind you, which I commented on. I said, oh, that's a really cool picture. That's sort of my style of art. What's the story behind the picture?
So that was done by artificial intelligence. I have done some experiments. I'm at my house here in Provincetown, and it's filled with original art, some by people I know, some by people I wish to know. I love their artwork. But I was playing around. I had heard that you could use a version of ChatGPT, same platform, OpenAI, to create images, and it puts the human in the position of being sort of a prompt and a curator. So you put in words, like for this one in particular behind me, I put in cottages on a beach, and I think I used some sort of language around the style, and then it outputs, I think, 4 at a time in little boxes, and then you can do variations on those boxes, and then you can expand it, and then you can crop it differently. And then this one in particular, I did an acoustic treatment I did on top of it and had it printed and framed. So it's a little bit of a collaboration, but it's mostly AI.
It's really cool. When you first told me it was AI, because I'm like, oh, I really like your painting. I thought you meant it was like a virtual background. And then you're like, no, that's a real wall and that's a real painting, but AI generated it. So,
and I'm a real person.
And you're a real person. And yeah, exactly. This is a real conversation, not my avatar. But I do want us to kick off by painting a picture of what work could be like / would be like in the next 5 to 10 years. Because I think a lot of listeners, they're still like, I was in a meeting today at our church, which I helped found. And, it was an in-person. They're like, can we do this on Zoom? And I'm like, actually, I like brainstorming better in person. But then I lead a remote team, a little team that does all this. We're all remote. I got people in New Jersey, someone in Massachusetts, Toronto, and then up here, right? So, we run a virtual company. We get together 3 or 4 times a year. A lot of people, their head is still spinning over a hybrid workplace, but it's going to get a lot weirder, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the things I say to folks is we're all sort of a little hyper-focused on 2 questions: where work's going to take place and what technology is going to do that we're not going to do anymore. And I actually think that's really 2 of 5 big questions. So first and foremost, who works? The workplace was largely designed for a straight white man who had a wife at home to manage all the caregiving responsibilities.
Hmm.
And not only straight man, but neuro non-divergent, which is actually probably a smaller percentage of the population than the broader percentage of the population. So,
Hmm.
what is our workforce? What could our workforce be? It's female, it's a variety of races, it's a variety of gender expressions, it's a variety of sexualities, but it's also a variety of neurodiversity. It's also a variety of learned and lived experiences. So, like you came to doing this work from coming from a church. Other people may come to work from experiences in the military. Other people may come to work from experiences being in illegal activities and being incarcerated because you actually learn
Hmm.
something from all of those things. So whereas we think about like kind of one profile of the worker, and when we even talk about diversity, we kind of talk about the stuff we can see, and there's so much more diversity in the stuff we can't see. So that's one thing. The second thing is what we do. Now we know technology is going to consume some tasks. It already has. And we've adapted, like, if I took your phone and I wiped out your contact list and I handed it back to you, you couldn't call anybody because you've already outsourced that part. Right. And we're going to continue to do that kind of things where we'll sort of realize we've handed things off and we don't do them anymore. It's okay. And then, how we work, we train people to do routine and predictable tasks largely in isolation. Most of the work we're going to have to do is in collaboration. So we're going to move from individual intelligence to collective intelligence. And then where we work, I think that experiments are going to begin now. Work may not be a place for everybody. It may be an activity. I think we'll figure that out. We've had 1,000+ days of a forced social experiment. We learned some stuff. We learned a lot of good stuff, and hopefully we'll carry that forward. And then I think most importantly, and probably most importantly for your audience, is why do we work to begin with? We
Hmm.
once worked for survival, then we worked for too long for just identity and status. And increasingly, people want to work for purpose. They want to have a sense of self expression. They want to have an alignment with their values. They want to feel like they're having an impact in the world. And the existential crisis of the pandemic really brought that into focus, where a lot of folks were like, I'm not doing this anymore. This has been sucking my soul for too long. I want to feel a real expression of who I am in what I do for work.
Well, it's interesting. I want to drill down on the why we work a
Yeah.
little bit before we dive into it, because that's a question I've been asking myself a lot too. What are your thoughts, and what are the different schools of thought on why people work?
Well, I mean, obviously, we most of us have to work because we couldn't otherwise provide for ourselves and our families. So there's that, of
I
course.
was going to say there is survival beyond purpose. It's
There's
like,
survival is
I
still
need to
there,
eat.
but I think
Yeah.
we found enough ways to do it that we can cover off survival for many or most of us, or we've certainly generated enough for all of us. But then it becomes, I think humans need activities. I don't think we're meant to be idle. I mean, we're really the only species that would create things that would replace us. Other species don't do that. We,
Yes.
we need to tinker. We need to do things. We need to
Mhm.
express ourselves. And so I think
Mhm.
that need for activity and self expression and feelings of productivity and feelings of engagement and feelings of connection are why we work. And what I think we need to do is figure out how do you optimize the human performance around those activities as opposed to grinding someone into dust.
Yeah, I was watching the Netflix documentary on the blue zones where people live to be 100. There's 5 or 6 places in the world. And one of the recurrent themes was you do better. There are a variety of forces when you have a purpose every day and you contribute. And that contribution could be, I tend the goats or the sheep in a more rural culture, or it could be I care after my aging aunt, or I'm needed to make lunch every day, or something. But it doesn't have to be grandiose. And look at me, I'm changing the world. But that whole idea of I'm making a contribution, my life somehow matters, I think is really important as well. So let's talk about remote work, because that will be a top of mind issue for a lot of people. Obviously, the pandemic accelerated the remote work trend. What do you see, when it comes to where we work, the way you phrase that? Where do you see that going in the next few years?
Well, I think before we get into sort of like exactly where we're going to work, I think what people need to kind of zoom out. I tend to
Sure.
zoom far out, but zoom out and say, okay, what really happened and why did we change? So what happened, I think, was prior to the pandemic, we had, and I use visuals, so I'm going to draw with my hands here.
Sure.
We had a big circle, and that was our professional life. And our professional life was our identity. It's what we thought about when we were little kids. We were asked what we wanted to be when we grew up. When other adults ask us what we do. It's a big focus of our life was that professional life. It was fodder for our CV, our resume, our LinkedIn profile, our just external identity, right? And we didn't really have any agency over it. It was just the thing that was so important about how we define ourselves. And then we had a smaller circle, which was our personal life for most of us. And it was fodder for our eulogy, but we didn't really think about that until we had the existential crisis of the pandemic, where we felt the fragility of life and the finiteness of time. And what happened during the pandemic is those two circles overlapped. And for a lot of folks, the professional circle shrank a little bit and the personal circle grew a little bit. And we had agency over both. And we also had autonomy, and we were accountable. And we had higher levels of productivity, and we had higher levels of engagement, and we had higher levels of trust and leadership than we do at this particular moment. Why? Because we felt not work-life balance, but life-work integration. And people hopped around from jobs, and they're still doing it, to find a place where they fit, where they belong, where they feel self-expression. So when we talk about where work's going to take place, I don't know where it's going to take place. We will continue to do things like this. We will continue to use Zoom and better products in the future.
Yeah.
For some folks, it is going in to a place every day. For other folks, it's never going into a place every day because they get too distracted. So I think the where thing is less of an issue than how do I feel like I have agency and autonomy and control over all 24 hours of the day.
What is your take on, and there's some major companies who are like everybody back in the office, from banks, but also tech companies. I mean, Apple called people back to the office, I believe. More recently, Zoom called people back to the office, which has an irony to it. Now, it's not 5 days a week, but 2 or 3 days a week. And I know in the church world, my sphere, a lot of people are kind of like everybody back in the office again. What is behind, both in the positive side and maybe the darker side of that return to the office? Seth Godin says some of that is surveillance capitalism. I get to see you, therefore I know that you're productive. What's your take on that?
I think some of it is real estate optimization, and it's the reality that we have fixed costs. We have to do something with. That is some of it for some folks.
Yeah, it is. It's like we're paying all this rent. We better justify it, right?
Yeah. I think there is the reality that most of the leaders we have in place today became successful in a different arena. And we haven't trained them to be successful in this arena. And that's not fair to them. And I think it's a sort of a knee-jerk reaction. For some folks, it works out great because that's what they want. And it's the right for their company. It's right for their culture. For other folks, it's not going to work because what you're doing is you're not listening to your people right now. So I'm going to be watching this because this callback to the office, I think, is like callback number 12 or something like that over the last 18 months. So it's a callback and a walkback, a callback and a walkback. So we'll see if it actually becomes the new normal or if it becomes another, hey, we didn't really mean that. I think what we really need to do, the question you're asking and the answer I really want to give is that I think we need to teach people to be successful, whether you're breathing on your people or not. How do you successfully manage teams when they're remote? When do you come together? Why do you come together? Because I remember the early days of the 3 days in, 2 days out, or 2 days in, 3 days out, whatever it was, people would show up on their day that they picked, and they would sit in their office and Zoom people were home that day. And it served absolutely no purpose, and it just irritated everybody. So we have to curate reasons we come together. There are some things we do better in person. I'm a speaker. In 2021, 90% of my events were virtual. In 2022, 90% were in person. So I have different experiences being in person with folks. There's certain things I can do virtually that are actually better than live. And then there are other things that are better live. So I think we have to sort of take all our biases off the table, realize when people need help, kind of focus on what problem we're actually trying to solve, and is there a better way of solving it?
I'm glad you touched on you had some really good points there. The arena you became successful in is the one you're going to want to recreate. Note that, underline it, and that is a recipe for becoming irrelevant and ineffective long-term if you're not willing to change. But you also said, and I think it's very fair and an empathetic reading, a lot of us were never trained on how to manage people remotely. Now, I've been leading remote teams since the 90s, just for a variety of reasons we won't go into. It's a learnable skill. What are some of your pro tips for leading a hybrid workforce or remote team or a 2 days in, 3 days out type workplace where you're not watching every moment?
Well, you kind of shouldn't be watching every moment, actually. Let's be honest.
I know, but
why
bosses
would you
feel that
fire
way.
people
People
if
have
you don't
said that.
trust
I
them?
don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Well, the question becomes sort of like, what is it that you need to see? I am very against any of the surveillance software. I think that if you're surveilling somebody, you don't trust them and you shouldn't have hired them. Full stop.
True. Agreed.
And it's a violation of human rights, I think, honestly. But what I think you need to do when you're managing a remote team is sort of figure out, how do I check in with people? When do I check in with people? And once you've created a diversity on where work takes place, you have a diversity on when work takes place.
Hmm.
So you give people the option to optimize to their time zone. So there are some people who are firing on all cylinders at 6 a.m. There are some people who cannot get anything going before 11 a.m. So it doesn't matter what time zone they live in, they sort of have a natural rhythm to another time zone. So figure out what people, and then there are people who have to pick their kids up at school or check in with elderly parents or whatever it may be. So the cycle becomes different. And when is the best time to catch someone and talk to them? Because if you're talking to them about, where are you with this and where with you that and where with you that, you're actually creating a task-based relationship where they don't really want to talk to you. But if you have a relationship-based relationship where you say, how are you doing? What's on your mind? How can I help you be more successful? What are you working on? How can I help you focus? How can I help you remove obstacles? Where do you need resources if I have them? Do you want to talk something through with me? So you become more of a coach
Mhm.
that helps your people become successful rather than a taskmaster that everybody wants to avoid.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and it does work. I mean, I have a staff who are doing everything from running errands to picking up their kids or arranging daycare and that kind of thing. But they show up. They show up day after day. They're responsible people. Do you think that and I have a very small team, so I'm not trying to exaggerate here, but do you think there are certain personality types that don't thrive in that environment? Like where you have that kind of autonomy and freedom, maybe don't steward it well? What are some tips for bosses or leaders who find themselves going, yeah, I wish it all worked that way. I'm not sure whether I got exactly that mix on the entire team. Any thoughts there?
Absolutely. There are some people, some know it, some don't, who basically cannot get things done without the structure and the deadlines. And
Yeah.
so for those folks, you have to say to them, all right, I know this is something you struggle with, so let's set some things in a place that we agree upon. Like, you're going to check in with me at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. or whatever. Tell me how you're doing. Tell me what you need. We're going to have interim deliverables so we make sure that you stay on schedule, because that's something you struggle with. Lots of people struggle with different things. So for the folks who do that, yes, they may need more structure. Some are better without structure, some need more structure, but you have to kind of come to an agreement on how to manage that, because you can't have agency and autonomy if you're not accountable. And if you cannot be accountable without structure, you need to agree to the structure that makes you accountable and successful.
So you've already hinted at it, the Great Resignation, but you argue that there were 4 other revolutions or movements that reshaped work since 2020. Can you walk us through each of those?
Yeah, and by the way, I think they're all going on. I think the next great resignation is probably more in the C-suite, because a lot of our leaders are
Ah,
just exhausted. They
yeah.
brought us through COVID. They've been dancing through whatever economic uncertainty, where the recession that's coming, it's not coming. Soft landing, hard landing, hard landing. Oh wow, we're still we still have record levels of unemployment. So those folks are exhausted. So that may be where we see it next.
Yeah.
But so to start off, so Great Resignation, everybody thinks of it as something that started in 2021. Actually, churn rates have been going up since 2009, since
Mm.
our last recession. So it's been rising steadily, and it was greater in 2022 than it was in 2021. And it's predicted it may be higher in 2023, but we'll see. And folks are hopping around. Sometimes they're doing it for short term, more money. A lot of folks are doing it for better fit. And I think that's
Mm.
good. And you can try out a few things to get there. So Great Resignation started more than a decade ago, almost 2. The great reshuffle is for people who left one industry, went to another industry. So they quit, but they quit with an intention to change. So it was a reshuffling, a reskilling. More than half the people who quit in 2021 and 2022 went from one industry or function to another.
Hmm.
That's posed us some challenges because with a finite and short labor force, it gives us big gaps in certain areas. It's making it harder. The great reshuffling is about 19 or 20 million people looking to change jobs to fit their lifestyle first and then their job second.
Hmm.
And then the great refusal was folks saying, I'm not going to work for $7.50 an hour anymore. If minimum wage had kept pace with pre-pandemic inflation or productivity, we'd be talking about $23, $24 an hour right now as a minimum wage. So we're way behind if we're fighting for 15. And then collectively, this gives you the empowered workforce, the great reset of how it's kind of a collective strike across in some ways, but it's also I want to fit in the right place, in the right job with the right skills in the right region. And we had the great retirement in there as well, which is really something we should have seen coming. We knew there were many more boomers than there were Gen X, Millennium, and certainly Gen Z. And so we're having, many more job openings than we have people to fill them. It's about 1.5 at the moment. And we've got 75 million baby boomers exiting the workforce between now and 2030. That shouldn't have been a surprise, but for some reason it was. And that gives us the empowered workforce. And it's not about where we work, it's about where work fits in our lives.
It sounds like the balance of power, if you want to call it that, is shifting or has shifted from the employer to the employee. Is that a fair read in all of those or not really?
Yes, I think so. And I think that was something that was sort of declared in 2021 and 2022. And every day with the sort of, well, here's the recession coming, was this sort of, and the power is going to shift back, and the power is going to shift back, and the power is going to shift back. When you have a labor shortage, which you do in the U.S. and in most developed countries, because of our aging population and our lower fertility rates, the power is not going to shift back unless technology really does consume half of all of our work, which I don't think it's going to happen that quickly.
Hasn't so far.
Yeah, it hasn't so far. And then the other thing you have is you have Generation Z coming online, about 13, 14% of the workforce now, 30% by 2030. And these are folks that were born in 9/11, had school shootings in grade school, never knew a time without war, had the global financial crisis when they were in grade school, had Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, finished their education in the pandemic. They have had body blow after body blow in every stage of development in their life. And now they get up to work. They're our first digital natives, but they're also saying, that's not really worth it. I would rather, work with a sense of purpose or not at all. And many of them are slower to adult, which I think is okay because I think they're going to be glacial. They're going to move slowly and cut a wide path. And they are going to change work. So some of these changes that kind of came about in the pandemic, I think they're going to make them permanent, make work better for all of us.
Yeah, that's a lot of change. But if you really think about it, like even the baby boomers exiting alone, succession, as you hinted at with the Great Resignation, has come up more and more on this podcast as people in their 50s, 60s, and beyond are just like, yep, this is my season, I'm going. And demographically, that's going to create a huge swath. What industries in the broader market are going to be hit hardest by the talent deficit, by boomers and soon older Gen Xers just tapping out?
I know the federal government is certainly one of them because, federal government used to be something you did if you were patriotic.
Yes.
And now it's something that nobody goes into the federal government. So we're going to have a huge loss of knowledge, tacit knowledge there. The sort of shuffling stuff we saw in the pandemic was a lot of folks leaving close contact industries. So for every 10 nursing openings, we've got one person training to be a nurse. Pilots, for some reason, for every 6 pilot openings, we have one person training to be a pilot. Every 3 engineers, we have one training to be an engineer. These are not things you can watch YouTube videos and figure out how to do on your own. Yeah. So we need a Marshall Plan.
And they're good paying jobs. Everything you mentioned is an excellent paying job.
Yes, in the trades as well. I mean, plumbing, electricity. we've gotten rid of all our vocational schools and systems. So, and we have sort of shamed people into thinking that everyone has to go to university. But you can have a great living as a contractor or owning a contracting company.
You'll make a lot more as a plumber than you will as someone with a 3-year degree in psychology, graduating with student debt, right? Like,
yes, depending on what you do with it.
Mm-hmm. Depending on what you do with it. Very good point.
Yes,
Very
because
good
I
point.
continue to be a champion for the liberal arts and anthropology and some of those things that you can, because I think most of what we're going to be doing with work is helping each other adapt to change. So I think those psychology degrees, the liberal arts degrees, the anthropology degrees, the ethnography degrees are going to be really actually very helpful, but you have to figure out how to apply it to the situation we're in.
Maybe my history degree will come in handy at some point in the future. I don't know, Heather.
I bet it has.
You know what? It does. It shows up all the time. It's amazing.
I went to art school. No one expected me to do this. Yeah.
No, it is good general training. I mean, that was the whole theory under the liberal arts, is it prepares you for life, right? You learn a little bit of literature, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of history, a little bit of this. And so, I don't regret it. It was going somewhere, but law didn't end up being my life. Something else did. Anything else about millennials and Gen Z who are now really dominating the workforce? I mean, with boomers exiting, Gen X, my gen, being the smaller generation, they're going to be, if they aren't already, the majority of the workforce within a few years. What else are you seeing among millennials and Gen Z?
I think it would be a mistake if you're dismissing them, if you're writing them off. They operate differently because they've had different life experiences. They need our mentoring and our help. They are going to make the changes we kicked down the road and avoided. So it's shame on us if we don't look at their potential. Gen Z in particular is the most diverse and well-educated generation we've ever had. And we're putting a lot in their hands. So let's do everything we can to help them be successful.
What are the unhelpful or inaccurate stereotypes about Gen Z that you keep hearing?
That they're fragile. Now, they do have higher rates of anxiety and depression than any other generation, but I just rattled off all the things they've been through. So they've dealt with more than we've dealt with in terms of trauma in their upbringing. That they don't want to work, I don't think that's true. I think they want to work with a sense of purpose. They don't want to work because they're told to work. They don't want to work because they're rejecting, some of them are rejecting sort of a consumer-obsessed society. They would rather do without than have the things they want in their lives. To some extent, they said some of these things about the millennials, but I actually find it to be even more true about Gen Z. So I'm very bullish on them. I think they're going to be an incredible generation for us in terms of community, society, culture, belonging, reframing work. I think they're going to knit together the social fabric and the community that we frayed over, our generations. I'm Gen X, which nobody knows what Gen X is. It's a generation that badly needs a marketing department.
We've been forgotten always. I get DMs. I mean, technically I'm Gen X. I'm on the leading edge of it, but I get DMs all the time from people who are like, "Hey, how come you just talk about millennials, boomers, and Gen Z? What happened to us?" It's like, we've been forgotten. So I get it.
I mean, that makes sense. We were the latchkey kids, So.
And the smallest generation, right? The other thing, and this is anecdotal, so please correct the trend. Anecdotes are just that. They're anecdotes. But I have a number of friends who are parenting teenagers right now / early college students. And these are the kids who want to wear a suit to school, who want to go to the business school, who want the career. Is there sort of a revival in entrepreneurialism that's happening with Gen Z, or is that just a couple of anecdotes?
Well, they're either doing it with a sense of irony, which they could be.
It could be. Yeah.
And if they are entrepreneurial, it doesn't necessarily mean a business suit, but each generation has gotten a little bit more entrepreneurial, and I think that's good. I think, if you look in the US about where our jobs come from, 90% of our jobs come from firms 5 years and younger. So it is the new organizations that actually drive work, because the big organizations hire a lot of people, but they shed a lot of people first. So they're always in some state of becoming more efficient, where the new firms actually create new jobs. So
I did not know that. That's fascinating. Okay, so on that note, if you were going to start a company today, and you can think, it could be a creative arts company, you have an arts background, it could be you're planting a church, it could be you're starting a restaurant, or some kind of consumer business. What would you do culturally for your workplace, and how would you position yourself to be well positioned for what's coming 3 to 5 years down the road? Everything from like office space to budgeting to how you would create staff values. Like what are some of the building blocks? And obviously that's a really big question, but like what are 2 or 3 essentials that you'd be like, everybody pay attention to this? What's your advice there?
Yeah, I think that whatever the entity does, I would look for people obviously smarter than me. That's where I think most of us go wrong. We look for people where we know more than they do. That's a huge mistake. I think I would look for people who wanted to make an impact in the world around whatever the mission of the organization was. So that has to be first and foremost. I would want to pay them very well. I'd want them to make as much as I do, if not more, because they will continue to be loyal to the organization and it will continue to grow. So I wouldn't look at skimping on pay. I think that's a mistake that we make. And then I would say that we probably don't have an office space, for me anyway, because I travel all the time, so I'm comfortable moving around. And so I would pick places that we would meet, probably quarterly. And for folks who needed it more frequently, we could arrange spaces that they could use to make it more frequently. But it would be much more about attracting the talent, compensating them really well, and attracting them around an idea that they want to be a part of more than anything.
Tell me more about compensation. One of the things I have really fought for is a living wage, which has not been the case in a lot of churches. You either get way overpaid or way underpaid, both of which are problems. But let's talk about a generous wage. We've had Aaron Meyer, who wrote No Rules about Netflix with Reid Hoffman on the podcast. We talked about how, the rock star principle that one overperformer is better than, 10 underperformers, and you should just compensate them well. What's underneath that drive for generous compensation in your mind?
Well, do you know the strong link, weak link theory of sports?
Go ahead. No, I don't.
Okay. So a game like basketball is a strong link, is a strong link theory. So if I could get a Michael Jordan or a Shaquille O'Neal or a Scottie Pippen or you name the player on my team, it wouldn't matter that I can't even dribble the basketball because they would just score all the baskets and it would be great. But if you had me on the soccer field, if you improve your worst player on the soccer field, you're going to score 3 times as many goals than as if you improved your best player 10%.
Wow. I did not know that.
So I think more of work is weak link. And so the whole star performer thing, it works in some environments, it works in some types of work, but I think most of work is really that collaboration where one weaker player is where you want to perform better. And some people take that as an excuse to force rank people and cut the bottom 20% all the time. All that does is create an environment of fear where nobody gets anything done. So I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think it's hiring people in who are the right fit and then compensating them well so that you get higher performance in the collective team rather than focusing on a single person at the expense of the rest of everybody else.
It sounds a little bit like no more B players. Is that sort of what you're driving at or something else?
I don't know that, but that just by the nature of what you're talking about, it sounds like it.
Yeah, because there is that theory, because if there are studies that show if you hire the rock star sales executive from another company and they come over, they're not necessarily going to perform. It's sort of what you said earlier, right? Like, oh, they were successful over there, but there were so many things that factored into that person's success to replant them over here. It may not work out. And often, I don't think the track record is very good. I forget whose research that was.
Yes,
so the other theory is...
Yeah, I didn't know that. I also know the whole VORP thing, value over replacement player. So like, what's your value versus someone I could put in your place? Which is looking at statistics from one environment, putting them in another environment. And I don't think that actually works out either. Because you can take, the best player in the world, and they've proven this with even though basketball teams are a strong link sport, they've found that the people who play together longer can perform better, even if individually, statistically, they're not as good as having one great player on another team.
Right. And so the no more B players is you're weakest or most underperforming or bad hit to your culture player actually drags everybody down significantly. And if you replace that person with somebody who is much better, at least the average or higher, that actually really over delivers beyond what you think it would.
But I think the same
helpful.
notion is true, because you can sometimes have people on a team where you don't really know what they do, but they make everybody else better.
Yeah.
And you could remove them thinking, because you look at their individual performance and you don't realize what they contribute in the collective performance, because we don't have a way of tracking assists when it comes to work like we do in sports.
Right. You're right, because they're batting .211, but they're amazing on defense in baseball, and they're fantastic in the clubhouse and really boost morale. And you pull them off the team, sure, they might bat ninth, but I know a little bit of baseball. That's about all the sports I know. So there's my analogy, the end of my knowledge. You talk a lot about empathy. You think empathy is going to be a key in the future. And I find there's two poles at work. I want to test my theory out on you, Heather. So, on the one hand, a lot of workplaces are not empathetic. I come from a law background. A lot of law firms are just like, how was your weekend? Terrible. My mother was hospitalized. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. By the way, you're doing court at 10 a.m., right? There's that environment where you just ignore what's going on in people's lives. And then I find with a lot of churches, they almost overemphasize what's going on in people's lives. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And, because they're shepherdy type people, et cetera, et cetera. But nothing gets done. Like, there's no performance, there's no deliverables, there's no goals, there's no KPIs, there's nothing. It's just like we're all sitting around here oozing and caring for each other. You're talking about something different. What do you mean by empathy?
Yeah, I think what happens is people conflate sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And so when somebody's mother passes away or mother goes in the hospital, we should have sympathy, we should have empathy, we should have compassion. But I realized this because I was done a ton of interviews for the latest book, Empathy Advantage. And somebody said to me, well, yeah, I'm so tired of being empathetic. We got through COVID. I had to feel bad for people. So you're just saying we have to keep feeling bad for people and expecting less of them? I said, well, on the day they put their dog to sleep, or if their parents in the hospital, yes, you should have compassion for them. But what I mean by empathy is empathy to understand how to help people become self-propelled. So let me back up for a second and explain what I mean. I think there are really 4 shifts taking place that need to take place for leadership. First is a shift in mindset. So it used to be, I'm the boss, everybody works for me. I focus on managing people and processes. I'm the unquestioned expert. The reality is, most likely, you have a team of people who have skills and knowledge you don't have. So instead of being that unquestioned expert, which is, by the way, a liability now, you need to be a humble, curious learner, and you work for the team. Their success is your success. So that's first, a shift in mindset of who the boss really is, who the manager or leader really is. Second is a shift in culture, because if you're managing a team of people who have skills and knowledge that you don't, most likely across the team, there's a lot of unique knowledge in those individuals that isn't redundant. So you can't pit people against each other in sort of a Hunger Games peers as competitor kind of thing, which is what we've done. Instead, you need to shift your culture to be one of peers of collaborators. The third is a shift in approach. We used to get things done by extrinsic pressure, punishments, threats, and rewards. But the speed, scale, and scope that we need people to learn and adapt will not work that way. We have to use intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation means you actually have to know your people. You have to use empathy to understand them, so you understand how to help them motivate themselves. How do they help them become self-propelled? And then from a behavioral standpoint, we kind of myopically drove productivity with domination, fear, or even humiliation, when really what we need to do is create effectiveness through inspiration, caring, love, and belonging. And those things all require empathy, but it's empathy as a performance driver to achieve those things. It's not empathy / sympathy and compassion where I feel bad and I expect less and nothing ever gets done.
Well, I think you've named a really big issue that a lot of leaders, I don't think too many people would disagree, even those people who might say, yeah, I used to try to do extrinsic controls and motivation or fear or reward, and those external motivations just don't work. I think people would say, yeah, we see the change. How do you begin to do that? Like, how do you begin to make those changes? Can you give us some keys to realizing those 4 shifts?
Yeah. First and foremost, you have to understand that the way you did it is not going to work going forward. And you have to
Mm.
say, it sucks and I'm sorry. Those are the things you have to start with.
Mm.
Because I had a couple different events where it was all Gen X to Boomer, mostly male, mostly kind of had that mindset, I'm the boss, I'm in charge, I'm the in-question expert, and I'm trying to run these meetings and it's just not going well. And these kids today, all this kind of stuff. I said, right, okay. So you became successful in an office arena. You became successful with presenteeism. You became successful by kissing your bosses, whatever. And you said mostly yes, sir. There might have been a yes, ma'am on occasion, but mostly yes, sir. And you became successful because you were the first person in the office and the last person to leave, and you missed your kids' soccer games, and you missed a wedding, and you did this and you did that. You made all these sacrifices. Great. That's what got you to where you are. This next generation is not going to do that. And you can try, but they're not going to do that. So if you want to be successful, you have to abandon the things that made you successful to this moment. So first and foremost,
Wow.
that. And it does suck, and I am sorry. But if you want to be successful with this next generation, this post-pandemic workforce, you have to understand that you're only going to be as successful as they are. And so to be as successful as they are, you have to get to know them. I was speaking at one biotech company, and the leader had heard me like 3 times because I'd spoken to the company like 14 times or something like that in the last 12 months. And she said, I've heard you 3 times now, and you've said the same thing, and you've said it different ways, and you've tried to explain it to me. And she's like, I finally get it. When I was just managing process, my people were kind of depersonalized units of productivity. I didn't really have to get to know them. But what you're talking about is I have to get to know them and figure them out and use empathy to figure out how to make them be more successful, make them want to be more successful. So it is a shift in that you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about them, because if you don't think about them, you're not going to get to where you want to get to.
Wow. Okay, that's really big. So again, you got a whole book on this called The Empathy Advantage. But if there's 1 or 2 things, Heather, that a leader who's used to command and control, maybe that Gen X boomer leader who I am the expert. And you know what? You're reading the mail of most pastors, because who else gets up there and for 30 to 45 minutes every week puts a microphone on and everybody sits there and takes notes? I mean, that just trains you to be the expert, less curious and more confident. Where do you even start if that's how you're wired?
Okay. So one of the things I make all my audience do is say the 4 scary words to me that we're taught not to say as leaders. I do not know.
Uh-huh.
I do not know is the beginning of learning. So you are the expert with the microphone, but you're asking me questions. You're learning. We're learning together. We're discovering things together. So as a speaker, I don't know everything. I go into each environment. I learn something new. I reshape the next talk. I reshape the next thing I'm thinking. I've been wrong about things. I've been really wrong about things. I might be wrong about remote work. Maybe we'll all go back into the office. It'll be 2019 all over again by the time we get to 2024. I don't know. It's to reserve the right to be wrong, because that's the opportunity we have to learn and grow. And so I think that's the first step, is get comfortable with that.
I like that phrase, reserve the right to be wrong. I'm going to hang on to that one.
Yep. And there is now I don't know the word for it because I'm blanking on it, but I could find it. There's a Japanese pottery and it's a concept where you have a piece of broken pottery. Instead of seeing it as ruined, you glue it back together with gold or silver, and it makes a new, more beautiful piece. And I think of that in terms of leaders and how we should think about ourselves, because the moments that chip us and the moments that shatter us are how we rebuild from that are actually the moments where we have our greatest insights, our best set of knowledge, our greatest sets of understanding. I mean, Steve Jobs talked about how if he hadn't been fired from Apple the first time, Apple as we know it today never would have existed.
Totally. Okay, so I didn't know what that was called. I'd heard about it, so I'm not pretending to be the expert here. But a quick Google, just so you don't get 1,000 emails and I don't. Kintsugi? Kintsugi, is that it? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
That kind of
Yep,
pottery?
that's it.
Kintsugi. My apologies for probably butchering that pronunciation. Kintsugi. Got it.
But that's the, I have the image of my mind of the beautiful piece of
Yeah.
pottery with the
It's
gold in it.
beautiful.
Yeah. That's how we should be thinking about ourselves. I mean, we always try to be perfect imposters as opposed to being imperfect beta versions of ourselves, which is really all we are. We're prototypes. We're just putting ourselves in different experiences. Dan Gilbert said, humans are a work in progress and mistakenly think they're finished. That's also something I think we need to keep in mind because we're as transient now as anyone we've ever been. We're as right and wrong as we were yesterday and the day before, and we're all in pursuit of being the next best version of ourselves.
Well, not that you would know this from a lot of Christians today, but it is the Christian scriptures, the New Testament. There's a verse that says we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the power is from God, not from us. In other words, I'm pretty cracked, like I'm pretty broken. But if you caught some good from me, then that might be the grace of God shining through. Very similar principle. Beautiful. And Christian leaders, you should be good at that. I should be good at that. All right. So we're taking notes. Great. Any other thoughts on how to get better at this?
Realize, I learned this from Rashad Tabakawala. He is a fellow speaker and an author, and he says he begins every meeting one of 4 ways. What's on your mind, which allows people to just say whatever's on their mind, which be the thing on the screen that's not allowing them to see you or operate in the same space that you're in. Can you help me with something? We tend to assume that we're just there to lead and to help other people, but undoubtedly, now that you've got people reporting you with skills and knowledge that you don't, that immediately puts you in an authentic and vulnerable position. Can you help me with something? Can I help you with something? Can I help you focus? Is there something I know that you don't? Is there something I can give you a hand on? And then can we set the kind of groundwork that we can give each other feedback? So when we finish a meeting, maybe not every meeting, but periodically, can I say, can I give you some feedback? Can you give me some feedback? And then you're setting the conditions using empathy throughout that, but you're setting the conditions where you have trust. And Dov Seidman says trust is the only human performance enhancing drug. We get a little dose of a chemical when we're trusted. We work harder for people who trust us. We want to be part of organizations where we feel trusted. So it sort of establishes that trust and psychological safety as well.
Yeah, that's an important paradigm. And the way I'm hearing it from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this sounds like table stakes for the future of work. It's not like, this is a nice to have. This is a need to have.
Yes, because your technology is going to do a bunch of stuff, and you can hire people with technology skills. But as soon as those technology skills change, they have to learn new ones. But they're only as good as you can get them to operate with the rest of your people and towards your common vision.
So I know your AI is not your expertise, but that is a beautiful piece of art hanging behind you. And there's a lot of speculation right now. I'm not sure anybody really knows, Heather, but like how disruptive from where you sit, and you speak about this all the time to workplaces, but how disruptive do you think AI will be, and what will it do to the human equation of work?
I think it's just going to make us get better at the things that humans are naturally better at anyway than machines. So like 10 years ago was the first time I had heard about generative AI. And it was well before ChatGPT even existed, but generative AI, which is the ability to tell a piece of technology to do something like that picture or to make a physical object, really becomes a collaboration between the human and the machine. So the machine won't just produce something, the human has to tell it to. So the human has to make that prompt. So one of the fastest growing jobs right now is a prompt engineer. So how do you create the language that makes the technology do something? And then how do you collaborate with that technology? So it's problem finding, it's problem framing, it's trying to find out that thing, like, should it be that picture of those cottages at that size? Well, that's what fit in this room, and that's how I picked it up to pick up on my glasses today. And then how do you curate the things that the technology creates? How do you make meaning from it? How do you optimize it? And so the technology is going to be good at some things, the human's going to be good at others. So I think we've been forcing humans to be more machine-like as machines became slightly more human-like in their ability to create things. And now we need to go back to having humans be more human-like. Humans excel at connection, belonging, empathy, and then the technology can do the tasks that we tell it to, and we can make meaning out of those insights that it finds.
What jobs do you think will be, as far as we can see right now, technology proof? Because, coming from a law background, my wife practiced for a long time too. A lot of those entry-level lawyer positions are disappearing quickly with AI drafted wills and forms, and I don't think litigation is being revolutionized by it right now. Accounting, a very similar thing. A lot of that's just math, right? You get smart spreadsheets and that'll go away. So a lot of those entry-level jobs, data entry, et cetera, even EAs, probably going to have a revolution there in the next few years. But what kinds of positions do you think will be, at least in an interim period, more resilient and technology proof?
Human-to-human jobs. So I remember when Frey Osborne model came out in 2013, it's 10 years ago this year, and they said that 47% of jobs would be done by technology by 2033. Now, anybody who predicts that far out with that specificity, probably going to be wrong. And that's something you should research. But I remember going through the report and thinking, okay, they did it by SEC code in terms of jobs, and then it ranked all the jobs. It looked at the tasks within the jobs. That's how they got to that number. And I looked at the job that had the least number of tasks that could be done by technology, and it was a recreational therapist. Because a recreational therapist is somebody who goes into like an assisted living facility and has activities for people. It's a very focused on like figuring out what the human can do, human wants to do, what's helping them become more engaged. So if you think about the recreational therapist and where is the recreational therapist in all the things that we do? So litigation, yeah, AI can spit out the bullet points of the argument, but can't persuade the jury the way a human can. What are the human connections, human communication, making meaning, framing a challenge for a solution that humans would work? Because ultimately, all this stuff should be in service to us. We seem somewhere along the way we lost that. These are tools that now can do things that, some things we cannot do, but it wasn't ever designed to enslave us. For some reason, we have this fear that technology is going to enslave us. That was never our intent.
Yeah, I think that's good counsel. And I think, as far as people who work at churches, the more that we are connecting human to human, trying to broker meaning in the midst of all this, because who knows what this means, probably the better we are and the more we lean into our calling, which is a happy coincidence or a happy merger. I'd love to ask you this question. I've asked Simon Sinek this question, asked Adam Grant this question, Susan Cain, I think many others. But I don't know whether you have a church background at all, and that's not really relevant. But if there was one piece of advice from what you understand of the church, where you see the church, if you could advise church leaders, it's like, folks, if you would just pay attention to this, I think it would go better for you. I think we really, really learn when we get advice from leaders like you. So what would you say to the church leaders who are listening?
I do have a little bit of a church background, so I did grow up with some church environments. So I'm at least familiar with what you do. I have heard it's described this way, that spirituality is the question and religion is the answers. And I've seen all the data that we're going through this de-churching phase. And I don't know if that has to do with the divisions that can happen around religion, that it can exclude people. But I also have read that there's a rise in spirituality. And so I think there are people who are interested in taking time out of their week and maybe going to a place or connecting to a place virtually or connecting with people. We are going through a loneliness epidemic. The Surgeon General has proved that. We have a huge swath of our population that is extremely lonely and wants to connect. We have questions about why we exist, why we're here. So the big forces are in your favor. We got folks who are lonely. We got folks with big questions. How do you become more of the environment that becomes the answer, or at least the place where they ask more questions?
That is such a helpful framing. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I say to folks, I don't have any answers. I'm just trying to get us to better questions.
That's a great question. And thank you. Anything else you want to share that we didn't touch on?
No, this has been really
super helpful. Yeah, it's been
you.
really interesting for me as well. So the book is called The Empathy Advantage. And where can people connect with you, Heather?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and I mention LinkedIn particularly because I think LinkedIn people think of it as a place you look for a job. I've never done that. It's my learning community. So it's where I
Mhm.
post what I'm reading. People tag me in things they're reading. So you can find me on there. I'm wearing some pair of eyeglasses. I don't think it's these, but you'll just see my
Yeah.
hair in
You
some
have
pair of
more than one, don't you? You have more than one.
I do. It's a little bit of
I
an
have one.
addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little bit of addiction. And then to find information about speaking and all that sort of stuff, it's heathermcgowan.com.
Great.
And those are the two places I really am. I'm not a huge social media person, but I'm very active on LinkedIn because that's my learning community.
Heather, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.